By the way, I did meet a Beatle. I hung out with Paul McCartney once.
Live from the Willie Nelson and Friends Museum Showcase in Nashville, Tennessee. It's Music is Funny. Musicians talking to comedians about music and comedy. With your hosts, Raelyn Nelson and Jonathan Bright.
Smoking, I'm so high, I keep toking, I'm drunk, but I'm still drinking too.
Welcome back to Music is Funny. I'm Raelyn Nelson.
And I'm Jonathan Bright from the Raelyn Nelson Band, back with another ridiculous and unnecessary intro. I don't even know why this is funny.
Jolis, 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 Jolis.
A Joe list.
Okay, so thank you so much for doing this with us. So we start every podcast by asking, first let me just say, don't be afraid to be silly and funny and don't censor yourself in any way. We're just trying to have a good time. You know, if you say something you want us to take out, just let us know and we'll take it out, you know?
Okay.
And, so we like to start every podcast by asking, what's the first music you remember loving as a kid?
Oh, boy. Great question.
Now we're talking very, very first, when you're like almost your first hearing of music.
Gosh, I haven't thought of that in a long time. Like, I remember, like, Billy Joel was big in our house early. I don't know how early that was, though. I mean, as a little kid, we weren't a big music house. But then, like, my extended family, I would say Billy Joel and the Partridge Family. My family would always, the older generation would always be singing Partridge Family together when they got drunk and stuff. And then Billy Joel, I think, was like early on music, I think.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Whitman, Massachusetts, south of Boston, about a half hour south of Boston.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I assume you got past the Partridge Family, like when you get into like junior high and high school. How did your musical taste flourish, change? You know, it's kind of a big deal when you're in high school or junior high. You're almost like joining a gang with your musical choices.
Part of your identity.
Yeah, so then I got pretty early. Like, I was trying to think of like 4 or 5 years old, but then I remember when Use Your Illusion albums come out, Guns N' Roses, 91. So I would have been 9 then. And when those both came out, my uncle, who was only 4 years older than me, long story, he got those, and I got really into Guns N' Roses. For a while, Guns N' Roses, Billy Joel, and Aerosmith. That was like what I listened to, those 3 artists. And then in high school, I got really, like 8th grade, 9th grade, I got really, really into Pearl Jam, which is still, I've seen Pearl Jam 44 times now. I'm like a Pearl Jam. So that was like Pearl Jam, Nirvana. And I got into Nirvana when Kurt died. So 94, I was like 12. So that was like 6th grade. So Nirvana, Pearl Jam in high school was like the big, and then Weezer, Silverchair, Toadies, that kind of, I was really into the 90s rock.
Now, why did you get to Pearl Jam before you got to Nirvana? It seems like they kind of came out at the same time.
Nirvana was a little earlier for me. So when they first came out, I was too young. I was like 9, so I was still not quite in there. And then when Kurt died, it was like I was in 6th grade. And that's when I first saw Unplugged. So I got really into that. But that was around the same time, like Better Man would have been on the radio. And I think Live, Throwing Copper was also out at the same time. Those all kind of came out at the same time. And then I feel like, and then Smashing Pumpkins were there too. So I'm not really sure. It was all kind of, it's all foggy, but all those kind of 3 or 4 bands were really at the forefront for me at that point.
And those were kind of bands you had to discover on MTV. It wasn't like I guess the internet was around, but nobody was on it. There weren't social media. So is that how you came, the radio and MTV and VH1, I guess? Yeah,
sort of older sibling. And like, I have a cousin, a sister, and an uncle, again, complicated family, but that are all the same age. And so I would kind of get into whatever they were into.
Right.
And at that time, you know, like Pearl Jam was like pop. That was like on, like, that was like a hit. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I kind of got into it that way. And then MTV was amazing. Like, I remember the Jeremy video and the Smells Like Teen Spirit video was still in play at that point. And Smashing Pumpkins Today, that video was huge. And I loved that video. So yeah, I was really big into that 90s quote unquote grunge scene.
Nice. And I got to say this, just listening to him, Raelyn is familiar with those weird family ages because her uncle's younger than she is. So,
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I love it when people think he's my dad. I text him. I'm like, hey, someone else thinks that you're my dad. 5 years younger than me.
It's funny because I would always tell these stories about my uncle, and people would be like, "What?" Because it would be about drinking. Like, "Oh, yeah, my uncle went out. We went out. We got hammered, and we met these two girls." And people were like, "Your uncle?" And I'd be like, it took me years to realize I have to say my uncle and I are the same age.
Yeah. When we were kids, he was 13, and I was like 17 or whatever. He'd be like, "Do I call you my niece, or do you call me uncle?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm totally calling you Uncle Lucas because this is funny."
No, my sister was, her uncle is like 6 weeks older than her. Yeah, so it's a weird thing. So my mother and grandmother were both pregnant at the same time.
wow.
That's weird. Yeah, it's like Father of the Bride too.
Hey,
And
Mom.
so
Go ahead.
my grandmother had two daughters that were pregnant. All three of them were pregnant at the same time.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Same guy? Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he got after it, this guy.
Hey, my mom's brother married my dad's sister.
Right, I got to do the math on that.
I know that's
Yeah,
hard. It's hard.
When you throw it out there, it sounds very ancestral. That's
I
why I
am my
like
own
to say
grandpa.
it. Yeah.
Oh wow, okay. So they're like two pair.
Yeah, exactly. They grew up kind of near each other, and the brother and sister married the brother and sister. Well, the brother
Yeah.
married the sister, but you know what I'm saying.
They didn't venture out.
No.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
Did they ever share?
I don't think so, but you should ask him next time you see him.
Okay, so your mom and dad, were they listening to Billy Joel? That was kind of their thing, or not really music people?
Yeah, they're not huge music. My dad had records, but my parents weren't as big music people. My dad a little bit more than my mom. My dad had like Simon and Garfunkel. Like I started raiding the record cabinet at some point, or the record, whatever you call it. And I remember Simon and Garfunkel was in there, and that got me really into them. But they had some stuff that I was like, Bread and like other groups that I wasn't really into. And then occasionally I found like there's an Elton John. I remember they had Madman Across the Water and stuff. So there was a couple good Elton John, but Billy Joel was definitely like a big sing-along, we're all putting this on kind of music. Trying to think of what else was playing back then. I think it was a lot of radio back then, and it was Rick Dees and the Weekly Top 40 kind of thing, or like
Rick Dees,
the old
Disco Duck.
70s. Yeah, and they would have a lot. A big thing was whatever played the hits of the 70s radio, and it was that thing of like, oh, remember this song? But that's how my family was reacting to it. But so I have like a pretty good knowledge of like all those kind of 70s hits, like Knock 3 Times and those kind of Partridge Family, all that kind of stuff was on that.
AM Gold stuff.
Exactly, yeah. That was big.
What's your go-to music to listen to now? Is it the stuff you loved in high school for nostalgia, or do you?
Clearly, you still like Pearl Jam.
Yeah, so I'm a big Pearl Jam guy. Springsteen so then in like high school, I had a teacher, Miss I. M. Pietro, who I'm still grateful for. Who, fun fact, her last name is a full sentence. It was one of these, came from Italy, and at Ellis Island, it said I. M. Pietro. And her last name is a full sentence. That's just a fun aside. But she we started talking about Dylan. I got really into Dylan as well, like probably around 8th or 9th grade. And then she gave me all these Springsteen cassette tapes, like bootlegs. And that got me really into Springsteen. And he just moved up to the top for me because I had sort of grown up in, suburbs and, felt like I wanted to get out, and Springsteen really spoke to me. And so Springsteen is still a real go-to, still. Pearl Jam. I've been really into Colin Hay. Do you know Colin Hay from Men at Work? He's fantastic, his solo stuff. I listen to a lot of Tom Petty, The Pogues. Who else did I? I'll throw on the Ramones. It depends on what kind of mood. Elton John, a big fan of. Pretty relatively eclectic, but mostly, kind of classic rock, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself like I do, or at least back in the day, like as a music listener, do you like just zone in on one band and just wear it out over and over and over and then move on to the next. Like, I used to be bad about buying the new record or the new whatever, and for a year and a half I'd listen to 2 bands and then like, all right, I'm done with them, moving on to these people.
Yeah, no, I do that. I still go through phases, and it's funny because like I'm such a massive Pearl Jam guy. Like I've seen them 44 times, but I'll go a long time. It's almost like a breakup. We were like, I don't need any Pearl Jam for like 3-4 months, and then they came to town recently, and I was like, I haven't listened to them in so long. I'm gonna just not listen to them until I get there, and then that puts me back in that mode and takes me back. And it's funny because I just saw them a few weeks ago at Madison Square Garden, and we were all filing out. You know, obviously thousands of us, and I was looking. I'm like, everybody looks old, and I first saw them in '96, and I just had this moment. It almost made me emotional. That I'm like, these are all the same guys that were there in '96. We just now we're all in our 40s and 50s. It's like this weird thing. It's like everybody grew up together, and now they've been around as long as Zeppelin had when I was in high school. You know?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's something about that community. Even, I mean, this is not really Pearl Jam, but there's a lot of those old hair metal bands that are still touring around. And there's some of the few rock bands that can get guarantees and fill up theaters because people, you know, say what you want about the hair metal era. They found their people and they've just grown old with them and just doing the same stuff, and people still love it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's that nostalgia, and it still kicks ass. I mean, all these groups still rule, I think.
For sure. And Pearl Jam still, they're not resting on their laurels. They certainly put out new music and that kind of stuff, so that makes it even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a new record during COVID, during the shutdown, and their shows they mix up the set list and play these really long shows and all that good stuff. So it's fun.
Yeah. Did you ever pick up an instrument or write a song?
I did. So I started taking mandolin lessons a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. When I was a kid, I got a bass. I had a family friend that played bass, and I got one in 8th grade. And it's my biggest regret is that I took like 2 lessons, and I've struggled with this throughout my life and career. Just staying focused and working, you know, anxiety and depression and all that shit gets in the way. And I wanted to be a musician so bad, as, you know, so many comedians want to be musicians. And I just never played, or it just seemed easier to do comedy because I didn't have to really learn a thing. And recently, a few years ago, like I said, I started taking mandolin lessons. I've since stopped, but I'll still tool around on it a little bit. And then last year I bought a guitar and learned 3 chords, and
That's all you need.
Yeah, that's all you need.
but I'm not good with the changes. I still can't change though. I have to be like 1, 2, 3. I'm not good at. I stink, and I haven't played in a while because if I'm not good, I'm like, fuck it, I can't do it, and so I put it down. But
Yeah,
it looks good in my living room.
Half the problem is just getting your fingers strong enough to push the strings down.
Yeah.
After that, you're pretty much on your way. And 3 chords,
Yeah.
you can already write a country song.
Yeah, or a punk song, I think. So maybe I should pick it up. This is inspiring me. Maybe I'll pick it up as soon as I'm done.
Yeah, I would sit, when I was first learning guitar when I was a kid, I would just sit in my room and I wouldn't even strum. I would just go back and forth between the chords until I got to where I could actually do it, you know?
How boring does that sound?
But I would watch shows during that time, you know, like sit and watch TV and just go back and forth between the chords so that my brain would do that, you know? I didn't get the F chord down for years. It was so hard to do bar chords.
Yeah. What we're saying, Joe, is we're looking for a guitar player, so if you could your skills, well...
And actually,
I'll
2
learn.
lessons of bass, you're probably pretty good. You don't have to have that much to know how to play.
I'll
the
learn. That's what's so frustrating is it took me, like, you know, I mean, this is like a deeper, you know, conversation about, you know, insecurity and belief and depression. But like, I really thought like, this is too much. I'll never be able to figure this out. And then you get older and you're like, oh, well, I can move my fingers. So it's like, I can just learn how to move my fingers. But like, it's not like physically I'm not able to do this. And I'm like, I'm smart enough to read and write. I should be able to figure out how to move my finger. But it took me 40 years to realize, I bet I could probably learn how to play guitar.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I was looking to be a virtuoso. I was just,
Right.
I wanted to be able to sit around a campfire and play a couple songs.
Well, saying that and talking about insecurity and stuff and depression, it's wild that you chose to pursue stand-up comedy, because I would think that would be much scarier, stepping up there with nothing to hide behind, you know, just you and the microphone and the angry crowd.
No, it's funny because it is and it isn't, in that I didn't have to with music. It's like you have to learn how to do. There's a thing you have to learn how to do first. Like you have to put in a ton of hours at home before you can even face that. Where comedy, it does feel like it's like I can just go up there and start talking. Not that it wasn't nerve-wracking and scary. And I don't mean to dismiss comedy as like easy, but it wasn't this obstacle of like, shit, I have to sit at home and spend whatever 500 hours by myself in my bedroom, where stand-up you could kind of just go and be like, well, I've kind of been doing this. Like in the classroom I was doing this. I'm just talking to people, if that makes sense at all.
It does, but it's still, you're putting in we always talk about this, how you guys are practicing in front of people, basically, because that's the only way you know if you're getting any better. You can't just sit in your room and tell jokes to the wall forever. And we've talked about, it's like, you would never go out with like a half a verse and a bit of a chorus and go, let me work through this, a little bit of this for you guys.
We're practicing. Hey, I'm just
Some of
now
it's going to be good.
I'm just bringing this song to the guys now, and we're going to practice it. I would never do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jerry Seinfeld had a great line. He said, comedian is the only art form where the first time you do it, you're introduced as that thing. You're like, you're a comedian, but you're like, but I'm not a comedian. I've never done this. And his analogy is like, you would never just give someone a knife and be like, you're a surgeon. Just keep cutting until the person feels better, you know? So yeah, it is weird, but, and comedy was scary and nerve-wracking, but for me, the fear of not trying it or not pursuing something was greater than the fear of failing at comedy. Like the idea of staying at home in my town and never pursuing it was the scariest thing. So that trumped the fear of like getting up and failing.
Okay, well, let's back up a little bit. What's the first comedian you remember seeing and then loving, or what was your like, oh, I could do that, or I do that, or what was the moment like?
So there was a few, I mean, like there's a bunch, but I mean, like, so I was a kid in the 80s. I was born in 82, so like 88, 89, 90, 91, that was like the comedy boom. So it was on VH1 and what do you call it? A&E, Evening at the Improv and all that stuff. So we would see that a lot, but I remember watching Bill Cosby, 49 was a special that my family would watch and die laughing at. What's his name? I'm blanking. Gallagher was like a big thing. People would rent Gallagher would be on. And then my uncle had HBO, and I remember seeing George Carlin. I think it was jamming in New York. That was 90, 91. So I was like 8 or 9 years old and being like, this is a big deal. And then Louis Anderson, I told this story recently when he passed away. I remember my family going to the store and renting his special, and there was like the VHS, and they like put it on top of the VCR, and then we got dinner and everyone had drinks, but it was just like it was waiting there on top of the TV. Like, we're gonna put this in soon, and it's gonna be fun. And my whole family got together. There was like 20 people, and I didn't get a lot of the joke. Any of these people, like Bill Cosby, I sort of understood because he was kind of talking about kids or parenting. And Louis Anderson to some degree. Carlin, I didn't get at all. He was talking about Dan Quayle and blowjobs. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But I could see like, oh, my family is like really enjoying this. And that got me really into it. And so then I would watch Elaine Boozler's another one we got really into. Like, we loved her. And I remember, like, you know, Rosie O'Donnell hosted VH1 Spotlight, and it would be tons of comics who I have no idea who they were then. I don't even know who they are now, because it would just be, you know, sort of episodic, and there'd be 3 or 4 comics. But I loved it and really consumed it. And I remember, it sounds like trite, but I remember being like 8 or 9 years old, being like, I would really like to do that. That seems really fun. And it seemed like a great way to get attention.
So how do you, like, at what point do you go, I'm going to try it? And then what's the first move? I mean, I'm assuming it's an open mic, but how did that go about? How did it go?
Yeah, so I wanted to do it in high school, and I felt like that's what I want to do. I want to do some kind of comedy. And I wanted to be like a filmmaker as well, but I was really into the idea of stand-up comedy. And then I graduated high school, and I was just kind of at home for a few months. And that's when I started drinking also, which kind of threw me off the path for a while. But so that's when I started drinking. But I was around, and then I went into Boston, and I saw a sign at a place called Chops Lounge next to Fenway Park that said open mic Wednesday. And I went home and looked at the phone book and called them, and it was like a Chinese restaurant, and I had a hard time understanding them, but I was like, is it true there's an open mic Wednesday? And they were like, I don't want to do the impression. I feel like it's offensive now, but whatever. It was like, she got through to me that Wednesday you could show up and do stand-up, and I went, and there was this guy named Larry Lee Lewis who hosted, and he did old joke. He played the piano. He was kind of a Jerry Lewis type of thing, and he did like old jokes, and he threw me up, and I did 3 minutes, and it actually went pretty well. And I remember he gave me his business card, and he's like, you got to come back next Wednesday. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, I'm in show business. This is crazy. And I wasn't, but it felt like I was. And then I just started doing it every Wednesday. Every Wednesday I would go do this open mic. And I did that for about 10 months. And eventually a comedian said, how come you're never at the show on Sunday? And I was like, I didn't know there was this. I just thought this was the only show. And they go, no, there's another open mic on Sundays. And so then I started going every Sunday, Wednesday. And then eventually it just became, this is what I do.
Now, for the first one, had you been thinking about doing it and have a routine, like have your first 3 minutes written, or did you see the sign and go, okay, I need to come up with 3 minutes here?
Yeah, I kind of was like, I got to come up with some stuff, and I did. It wasn't good. I mean, a couple of my first jokes, I said, this is in Boston, so I said I went to that Cheers restaurant. Nobody knew my name. That was like a big joke of mine. And then I said, this joke I actually think is pretty good. I said, my friend got me the worst apartment warming gift, an air conditioner. That was actually decent. And then,
not bad. You might need to work that one back in.
And then I had another one where I said, I went to the Celtics game, a lot of empty seats for a team called the Celtics. So it was a lot of like punch, but I was 18, so I looked like a kid. I mean, I looked like I was probably 13. So they were like, "Whoa, this kid's got something," because I actually formed. And this was like a true open mic. Like there was like crazy, there was like homeless people on there. There was just like people that were just in the hotel, like just insane people would go up and just scream into the microphone. And then there was a few real comics. And I was a teenager who at least said things that were like, you could tell a joke just happened. So right. I think they were kind of like, whoa, look at this guy. And it was enough for me. And then I remember thinking the classic thing that every comedian has. I thought I had to do a new 5 minutes every week. And so for the first like 10 weeks, I was like, shit, I got to write my 5 minutes. And eventually somebody was like, no, you can just work on the jokes and they'll get better. And I was like, oh, thank God.
Because I've got my first 3 hours already written.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I wonder if the open mics are with the recent boom in comedy. Because I back in the '90s went to some open mics that I didn't even really know what was going on. But it was the Wild West. It seems there was a puppeteer. There was a guy that just literally came from the bar, stepped up to tell jokes. There was a guy that got up there and froze and literally couldn't say anything and told a bad dick joke and got thrown out. But it seems like now, I don't know if it's still as wild as that, because people like the young kids seem to be coming in with a career in mind. They've seen it on YouTube. They sort of have a path that they're trying to go. I mean, of course, it's been a long time since you've been to an open mic, but I don't know. I just thought about that.
Yeah, well, now it is much different. And now, because of the internet and podcasts, it's crazy because young people are much more. Also, again, I was like a aimless alcoholic idiot, but like young people are like, they're much more business savvy because it's like, because of the internet, because of Instagram and YouTube and all this stuff, this kind of do-it-yourself thing. And like I said, there's just hours of podcasts where you can listen to like how people have made it, how people started, all this stuff where we didn't really have that. I mean, I know I sound like a boomer, but I'm like, we didn't have that back in my day. Like, it was kind of like you just saw the people that had HBO specials, and then there was an open mic. So you're like, I guess I'll just come here until somebody gives me a shot. Where now you can really study how it works, how to succeed by listening to podcasts and reading all these interviews and stuff. And go, okay, you got to do that. You got to get on Instagram and post your clip, whatever it is. So yeah, now it feels like people can kind of get success a little quicker, or at least get seen quicker. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
at all.
definitely.
But then there's a whole lot of people doing it in the same
Well, the
spot,
problem, the
too.
downside is also what you're describing, because I'm even older than you. It's kind of the same thing with bands. You just go play gigs and try to get a record deal. But now you have all that information, but unfortunately you have to do all of it for yourself. There's all this other stuff. It's hard to be an aimless alcoholic comedian now because you get too busy trying to post a clip or finding old stuff, or that it seems like. I'm not a comedian, but
Yeah, well, no, it's very frustrating for me. I mean, for everybody. But no, I feel my age sometimes, because it's like when I was like, hey, wait, what is this? We're running a business? I just wanted to write jokes and go up and tell jokes, and now it's like you have to edit clips and you got to get someone to videotape you every show, and yeah, it's a lot more. There's a lot more sort of business side of it, in tweeting and posting reels, and then there's like TikTok, which I refuse to get on, which is detrimental to my career, but I hate it. And, there's like YouTube and podcasts, of course, now. So it's like there's a lot more to do, and like musicians, I'm sure it's like, hey, I was trying to get out of working. The whole purpose of this was to have an alternative lifestyle. Like I didn't want to work, and now it feels more like a job. So it's tough. Pardon me, there's a siren coming by my house. But anyways, yeah. So it's a lot more work that I hate.
So how did you get from Boston to New York? Because we've talked to people like Nick DiPaolo and Dane Cook, and who there seemed to be sort of a pipeline of people that had been there that lived in Boston, or somebody would take them with them to Boston. Did you have any from Boston to New York for first gigs or whatever? Did you have anything like that going on when you got there?
Yeah. So like I always knew I wanted to live in New York. So I was New York obsessed because of Seinfeld and Woody Allen. I was like just completely obsessed with the TV show Seinfeld and Woody Allen movies. So like to me, that's where I wanted to live my life anyways. That just felt like, and like Springsteen too, the idea of like, we got to get to the city, So I was completely obsessed with the idea of living in New York from a young age as a kid. And then with comedy, you start being around, and there was talk of guys that had gone on there. Like, Dane Cook had been in Boston a few years earlier, and Gary Gulman. And there's a guy named John Fish who moved right after I started. So I had known, I was like, okay, that guy was here and now he's there.
Right.
So I kind of had an idea that that's what you do. You move to New York. And in Boston, everyone had an idea of when you want to move to New York, you should move then, you should move at this time in your career. So that was sort of always the idea. Like I said, even before I was a comedian. And so then I was just kind of around. I did comedy in Boston for about 7 years. And I knew eventually I'd have to move. But again, you get caught up in this thing of at that point I had become kind of a big guy in Boston. Not big, but people were like, he's good. I would get gigs opening for people, and people knew me, and I was starting to make some money. And again, with drinking, you kind of I'm here, I'm drinking, people respect me here. It became that thing of am I going to move? And then there was a young comic named Dan Bulger, who was a few years younger than me. And he was like, I'm going to move to New York. Didn't you say you wanted to move to New York? And I thought okay, if this guy's going, I'll go. You kind of have this is my chance. And so because he was going, I was like, all right, we'll go together. You have that thing sometimes. You're like, just give me one other person. If you're doing it, I'll do it with you, know? And so that was kind of the idea. And when I got there, there was a couple people I had known there. And like you said, I would make trips every once in a while. I would go down there and do a set or whatever. I'd scope it out. I was kind of casing the joint,
Right.
And eventually you just make the move. And when I first moved here, I would just drive back to Boston every weekend because I was like, nobody knows me here. I suck. Let me just go back to Boston where everything makes sense. So it was one of those things. And then eventually people go, I thought you moved. Did you move or you didn't move? And you're like, fuck, I'm here too much,
It's like a guy graduating high school and going back to from college to the high school town every weekend just to hang out.
Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like. And then you're kind of like, I guess this is pathetic. God damn it.
So did you, because your crew, I guess you would call it, is one of my favorite, it reminds me of the Tough Crowd era comics that were in New York at the time, because that was some of my favorite. That's what I grew up on. And it seems like your crew of, you and DeRosa and Shane and Mark Norman, all those guys, seems to be back to that type of humor, the ball busting humor. Everybody stays in check because everybody's giving each other shit. I don't know. It's my favorite kind of comedy. I don't know. Were you fans of that growing up? Those comics?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because, you know, to me, that's the kind of humor my friends had growing up in New England. Is like even before I saw a Tough Crowd or anything, we just all were trashing each other constantly. I mean, it was horrible. It was really, but it was fun. So I sort of come, and my family too. It's like I sort of come from that kind of hang. That's what you do with your buddies. You kind of just shit on them, and everyone makes fun of each other and pranks each other. So then, yeah, when I started in Boston, it was a similar kind of vibe. So that was always the way we were. And so then when you go to meet comics that are similar, you're like, this is great. This is like, it's almost like the, I always think of the Blind Melon No Rain video that the B-girl finds all her buddies. You kind of go and you're like, oh, great. Everyone else is doing this too. It's perfect. But yeah, no, that helps. And it definitely keeps everybody in check. I mean, sometimes it goes too far and you're just hurt. And the older you get, the more you're like this. Well, you got a new shirt. Good for you. That's fun. Kind of soften up a little bit. But yeah, having that crew of Sam Morril and Mark and Shane, like you said, and DeRosa and Ari Shafir, it's definitely, it's a blast, and it definitely helps and inspires you.
And keep you in check.
Yes, absolutely. No, there's a lot of like, we're not doing that. That's bad. Like, oh shit, all right.
I think that's why we did it as young boy. I don't know if girls do that kind of. I don't think they do, but it is just you kind of keeping your whole crew in check. And to your point, that's how I grew up. Everybody, even in my family, male and female. But yeah, you just shit on everybody in a loving way. Nobody took it too serious. Lines were crossed sometimes, but sometimes when a line was crossed with you, it was so good. The best were the ones that just hurt just a little bit when they say it, like, oh, fuck, that's good. That's really good.
Well, Bobby Kelly, who's one of my closest friends, had a great joke years ago about how there's always the one guy that goes too far. When he's like, yeah, you suck. He goes, yeah, whatever. I heard your mom's sick. And he's like, oh, Jesus. It's that thing where you're like, oh, my God, that was horrible.
Girls don't do that.
They don't?
Girls don't do that, no. But have their own way of fucking with each other, but not like straight up
meaner.
Insult, mean, no.
You guys are nicely mean somehow.
I don't know. Like I would say, my real friends that are, that we're for each other, and it's no competition there. We fuck with each other, but
there's actually a group of women that are for each other.
It's just me and my friend.
Okay. Anyway, so you get to New York and you meet those guys. Now you mentioned you always were into film too. When did you go to New York with designs on anything other than stand up, or were you like, I'm going to do some of this, like Seinfeld? And early on, that was the play. You just go there and get a TV show or whatever. But did you have designs on that when you moved there? Yeah.
So once again, it's like I went to the New York Film Academy in 2003. I was still living with my parents at that time, and it was like a 4-week acting program, because I had the same thought that I think I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I thought, it's so funny because I later heard George Carlin say like the same thing in an interview of like, if I can get big enough as a stand-up, people will just put me in things and I'll get in that way. And so I was like, eventually I'll have to act. If I do enough stand-up, I'll take a acting class. So I went to the New York Film Academy, where I studied, a 4-week immersive acting program. And at the time, also, I went to the Comedy Cellar every night, which was great because I saw, Colin Quinn and DePaulo before I knew him, and Chappelle was there all the night. So it was kind of like I went to film and comedy school at the same time.
Nice.
So I wanted to do that, but again, similar with like music, I just so badly wanted to be a filmmaker and a writer, and I used to shoot sketches and stuff when I was young, and then at some point I just stopped, and I think a lot of it was just partying and then just lack of belief in myself, and so I stopped doing that for a long time, and I really wanted to, and I just didn't pursue it until like more recently.
Yeah, we should talk about the movie you made with Louis C.K. How did that I know you've probably talked forever about this, for people who don't know. How did that come about? I know you guys are buddies, so how did the whole movie thing come about?
Yeah, so Louis and I started opening for Louis in like 2015, 2016. So we kind of became friends, and I toured with them, and we were both kind of movie nerds and would always talk a lot of movies and reference them. And, we'd talk in movie dialogue, and, we'd debate movies, and we were just obsessed with movies. And, it's one of those things we'd always talk movies. And I thought, like, I've always had movie ideas and I wanted to be a filmmaker and be in movies. And we would talk so much about it. And then you kind of have this thing of like, wait a minute, this guy, you have enough money to make a movie. Like if we talk about making a movie, we could, because that's a big thing for me that gets in the way. And it's another thing I loved about stand-up. And it's similar to why like not pursuing music was this thing of like, I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours and months on something that just never gets made. It never ends up anywhere.
Right.
I always say with stand-up, it's like I can sit here and write a bit and I'm like, I'll go do it tonight. It will be alive tonight. It may bomb, but at least it's made. With a movie, it's like you could spend a year writing something and then you just never get the money. But with Louis, I was like, wait a minute, man, like we could do it. You could pay for you could pay for this movie. You could lose a ton of money. But anyway, so we started talking, and I wrote a movie on my own that I was telling him about, and then we went through the script, and he was like, yeah, maybe it's something, and it kind of just died out, and then we started talking again, and I always tell the story. It's funny. He called me one day, and he was like, I got this project. I just came up with this idea in the shower, and I think it's good. And it was a musical about Bad Company, kind of like they made that ABBA musical, Mamma Mia.
Right.
He's like, this will be a musical, but with Bad Company. And it will have, Feel Like Making Love and Bad Company and all this stuff. And it was like a 20-minute pitch to me, just kind of going through this idea. And then he finished talking, and I was like, I don't know, man. It doesn't sound great. I was like, I just don't see this happening. I'm like, the licensing. I'm like, there's gonna be a guy brushing his hair. What is this? I was like, I don't think so, man. And I think he was kind of like, oh, fuck, all right, well. And then I kind of was like, I thought maybe you'd pitch like a black and white murder mystery, low budget thriller. And then he was kind of like, huh. And it felt like I had him on the hook. And so we just started kind of talking movie ideas, and then he had this idea about a married couple, just in some kind of, duress and trying to figure things out. And then I had this idea about, that I thought about a lot. And I jotted it down, this idea, like people my age, my generation are all going to therapy, and therapists are like, well, your parents did this and it made you this way. You should confront your parents. And I always thought it was funny that my therapist was telling me to go confront my parents, and I'm like, what does that even look like? I'm just going to show up and be like, you guys fucked me? Like, this is insane. Like, what that's insane. And so my thought just became that would be really compelling, as if an adult comes in and his parents are in their 60s, just living their life, and he goes, hey, you did this and it really ruined my life. Not to say my life is ruined, I'm just exaggerating, but like, you know what I mean? And what does that look like after that adult kid leaves and goes, okay, so that's what I have to say. Take care. And so that was sort of the idea, and that got us talking, and then it sort of became very like autobiographical, and we just made it this New England family, and it went from there. And then Louis was like, if we finish writing this, we'll make it. And I was like, great. And so that kind of motivated us, and then we finished it. He was true to his word, and we just made it. It was really fun.
Had to be the best of both worlds for you, or all worlds. You got to act, you got to write it, and you got to be funny.
Yeah, no, it was truly like my favorite experience, because we casted a bunch of friends and old comics that we knew, and we had complete creative control, and we did a lot of improvising and just hanging out, and we would shoot and rap and just sit around a circle in a fire all in front of the fireplace, or not the fireplace, the fire pit or whatever, and just laughed our asses off telling stories and got together and worked together the next day. And as someone who's done stand-up for so long, it was so fun collaborating with people to really like connect on a project, because that's what makes me want to be a musician and an actor, is that collaborating is such a fun thing, because you're connecting with somebody that you don't get in stand-up as much.
It is a fun thing, good collaboration. Now, was it weird when you're like basically 50-50 writing this thing, and maybe you go to pitch it, and maybe some people are, because his name is bigger than yours, just want to talk to that one person instead of the other? Is that ever a weird thing that you have to deal with? Not that I know anything about that kind of stuff.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's to some degree, I guess, but it was because I was like the star of the film. I think It's like we both did that to some degree. because people will be like, "Yeah, your movie, Joe, it's amazing," and then I feel like Louis like, "Well, I mean, I wrote it and directed the fucking thing." So it definitely felt like it was a very mutual project, but yeah, there's part of me that's like, he's the director, he's famous, and so it's his, and then I think for him, he's like, I'm the star and it's my story, so it's like we both kind of had that thing of like, no, it's mine, no, it's mine, and it's like it's off. But no, there's definitely people that were like, you have always when you're collaborating, somebody's like, I love this thing in the movie, and you're like, that was me, that was my idea. And then someone else is like, I love this thing, and you're like, well, that was him. All right, that was his idea.
Still pretty good.
When someone compliments something, you are like, I hope it's something I came up with. But no, I mean, ultimately, it was awesome and so fun.
I know one thing I wanted to ask about, and I was telling you today, I didn't even realize there were 15 seasons of it, but you were actually on Last Comic Standing, and that was the one with Norm as the judge, right?
Yeah.
And I remember hearing a story. I think Anthony Jeselnik, I think, was on a podcast, something, and
Esther.
Little Esther. They were talking about stories of Norm being mean to them, or on the set of that. Like, maybe you don't want to talk about it, but were there any? It seemed very interesting because it seemed like Norm might have been trolling. And I had stopped watching the show years earlier, but so I didn't see the episodes. But I just can imagine Norm in that position and what it must have been wild, dude.
Well, he was awesome to me, but yeah, he was definitely, I guess mean. I mean, he took it serious. I think he was like, I'm the judge, and there was a bunch of people that he was like, that sucked. I didn't get it. I wasn't funny, or whatever. I was fortunate. He was really, really kind to me, but they kept us really separate. Like all of our interactions were on the show, but he was tweeting about me and very nice, and we became friendly afterwards. But yeah, I don't know. I'd like to hear the stories, but I know some people were pretty devastated because he gave them criticism that they didn't like or whatever, that maybe was mean or out of line. But he was incredibly nice to me, so it was great. But yeah, I actually did it twice. I did it one season. I got edited off of it. It was like heartbreaking. They didn't tell me, and I watched. Oh. And I had told my friends and family, and I just never appeared, and nobody warned me. So it was like a low in my life. And then I went back and did it the second time, where I was a finalist and made it to air. But by then the show was like way less viewed, and it wasn't in prime time anymore. So it just wasn't it didn't blow me up. I'm sure you've dealt with this. There's been so many things in my career that I was like, this is going to blow it all up. Yeah. Here we go. And then you're like, nothing. All right, well, keep moving, I guess.
Right.
Yep. It's a series of those.
Yeah, for
actually.
Sure. If you stay in it long enough, and you have to get any success.
You have to, yeah.
So when you were living in New York, did you hit the road, or did you mainly work out of New York? At what point did you start getting on the road? We live here in old road stories, but it's so much different between the generations of comics we talk to. Some of the newer ones have never really been on the road, work out of the same spot. Some worked out of, I guess in Los Angeles, you can only do so much before you have to take a flight. But being in New York, there's places to get around. Did you make it out and do the circuit a bunch?
Yeah, so when I started in Boston, and there's like so many gigs there that were like, so from an early age, I was doing like road, like in your car, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, out and back, one-nighter gig. Right. A lot. And there was just so many fundraisers and VFWs and firehouse shows. That's like a big thing. In fact, I'm doing one Saturday still for my uncle's fire department.
Nice.
We'd just be going, doing shows at firehouses. So like, even from an early age when I was young, because I got good pretty early, like an MC. I was a good opener. So I did all kinds of gigs all over Maine, New Hampshire, and down to Jersey. So I was always out in my car, with like handwritten directions and stuff. And then when I moved to New York, before I moved to New York, I met DePaulo, who I know you guys talked to. And then he took me on the road, and I started doing like the road with him back in 2006 is when I started working with him. And I would go and do all his road dates, which was a trip.
I can imagine.
For a variety of reasons. But yeah, so I started working like the road, like, flying, staying in a hotel for 3 days, coming back in 2006. So it's been a long time now. But yeah, I'm on the road now. I go out less because I feel I want to be home more, but I still go out 30, 35 weeks. a year, probably closer to 30, I guess.
That's a lot still.
Isn't that wild that comedians traveling as a single person, though, when they finally officially do the road, they're on planes. We're still in vans driving 11 hours, 10. It's kind of a bummer.
Well, the band, it's a funny story. Do you guys know Henry Phillips?
Yes.
Comedian.
From Stanhope's buddies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a comedian, musician, and he's just the best. And he made a great movie called Punching the Clown, which is the best movie ever about comedy. But just working the road in general. But he has a funny story that just reminded me of. He was at the Improv in Hollywood recently, which is like his hang, and he was in the upstairs green room, and there's a bunch of guys hanging out, and there's like 4 or 5 guys hanging. They're like, "Oh, we're in a band," and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, I was in a band for 10 years. I did the band route. He goes, "It's brutal, like, you know, the buses, and you got to split the money. You make no money. You're treated like shit." And he talks for about 10 minutes about how hard it was and why he quit. And he goes, "What's your band called?" And they go, "We're the Killers." We just did, they're like, "We just did the Forum or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, sorry." Yeah. He's like, "I'm a fucking idiot." He's just talking about how brutal the road is, and they're like, you know, whatever, this huge band. But anyways, I don't know what made me say that, but because in a band you're gonna be in a bus and stuff. But yeah, no, I mean, when you're opening in comedy, though, that's the hard thing, is like a feature act's getting $100 a set. So you'd book a $500 flight and then get paid $600. Like, okay, I made $80 or whatever. No, it's much better.
Those exposure gigs.
Oh, yeah.
We've all heard that line.
Exactly.
You're paying to play. Okay, so before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about my grandpa, Willie Nelson. When's the first time you remember hearing about my grandpa? Do you have a funny Willie story, or maybe?
Boy, first time. I don't know. Do I have a memory? Is he in like a Sesame Street movie or something like that, or
The Muppets? The Muppets.
Yeah, maybe I remember him there because so iconic. He's like one of those guys that I just always, you knew who he was. That look with the sort of red bandana and. But yeah, I don't know what's On the Road Again must have been the earliest song and the most like, I mean, that's still one of my favorite songs. And I think about it all the time. Every time I go on the road, I sing that song. So yeah, that's gotta be the earliest. And then You're Always on My Mind, I think was like an early song I remember hearing. And Georgia on My Mind. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Georgia on My Mind. So like those songs, I remember there's those songs that are just always in your, I don't remember a time when I didn't know those songs.
Right.
But I don't know about a funny story. My sister-in-law just saw him like recently, like a few weeks ago in Connecticut.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah. But
She had an affair with him. Funny story. She beat him backstage.
We're family now.
But yeah, no. So like I said, just one of those artists you just always are there. I mean, like Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson and the Beatles. It's like I don't remember a moment of someone being like, "There's this guy named Willie Nelson and he looks like this." It's just kind of like
just
that
there.
iconic musicians that are just there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, would it be imagined like a world before that when you actually get introduced to him? Like if you've never heard the Beatles and got to see him for the first time and be like, whoa, shit. Like Willie, there was no Johnny Cash. There was no Willie Nelson. It'd be wild to see them come through the door and go, what the fuck is going on with these guys?
Right. No, it's, there's those iconic artists that, like I said, they've just always been there. By the way, I did meet a Beatle. I hung out with Paul McCartney once.
Nice. How was that?
About 15 minutes. Yeah. It was pretty amazing. I mean, I'll give you the story real quick if you want. It's a crazy story. So Louis C.K. is a good friend of mine, and this was years ago before, his career sort of changed. And Paul McCartney was at the Garden, and I had just got married, so that was his wedding gift. He's like, "I want to take you to Paul McCartney," and he had sold out the Garden like 7 times that year, 5 times that year. So he had the VIP treatment. So we went, and then we were running a little late because of him. I'm psychotically early. But when we got there, we were in the bowels. We came in the VIP entrance, and McCartney was like carrying his bass like underneath going to the stage. So he just walked by us, which was insane.
Wow. We
went up into the VIP section. We're sitting, and it was Louis and then me and then 2 empty seats and then Stevie Van Zandt and whoever he was with, a woman that I don't know if he's married or it's his girlfriend, whatever. So they're sitting there, and I'm like, that's Stevie Van Zandt. This is like insane. Of course, I'm a huge Springsteen guy. So we watched McCartney play all these hits. You just forget how many hits. He's playing Beatles songs, playing solo songs. It's just crazy. And then about halfway through the show, an usher comes and goes, excuse me, you got to stand up. And Bruce Springsteen and his wife, Patty, kind of shuffle past and sit in these two empty seats. So now it's Louis, me, Patty, Bruce, Stevie. And I'm like, this is like insane. I'm elbowing Louis. I'm like, this is crazy. Then Paul plays Hey Jude, and we're all doing the na-na-na-nas. And Patty's like filming Bruce and pans over to me. So I'm like in a Springsteen family movie. And we're doing the na-na-nas. And then a guy comes and grabs Bruce and Stevie and is like, come with me. And they shuffle out again. And, you're standing like this, and they're just like brushing by you. And I'm like, Bruce Springsteen, I'm like, he's like my dad. I everything I have, I owe to this man. And they leave, and I realize, he's going to play the encore. That's why they came to get him. So they bring out Bruce and Stevie, and they play I Saw Her Standing There. And then, I've never seen this at any concert. I've been to 500 concerts. Paul just goes, that was great. Let's just do it again. They must have just rehearsed that one song.
What?
And so they just played it again. They just played I Saw Her Standing There twice, back to back, which is just hilarious to me. The same song 2 times in a row.
You mean nobody told Paul McCartney he couldn't do that? How dare they?
Exactly. So they just went, all right, we're playing it again. And then a guy came over and said, hey, do you want to go meet Paul after the show? And again, we're like shoving each other. We're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And we went down. And we were early. We're like the first ones in this big, party area. And Paul came right over. And Paul and Louis had met before at SNL, the SNL 40, that big thing they did. And so we just chatted for about 15, 20 minutes. And the whole time he's talking, I was just like staring into his face, being like, I'm talking to a Beatle. I have to like take this in. And it's funny because he'd tell these stories. And the whole time you're like, yeah, I know all the story. Like, he's like, they released Pet Sounds and we wanted to do this. And so we made Sgt. Pepper. I'm like, I know. And he's telling all these great stories, and it was pretty great. And then we went over, and like I said, he talked for 15 or 20 minutes, and then he's like, all right, I got to go circulate. And we said, hey, great to see you. And then we went over, and Bruce was standing there, and Bruce was much more serious and not as outgoing. And he said, hi, Louis. And I just said, I'm a tremendous fan. And he said, thank you. And then we stood kind of 3 abreast, me, Bruce, and Louis, for about a minute, and we were kind of like, "All right, let's go get out of here. Let's take off." So Bruce wasn't unfriendly; he just wasn't gregarious, and he was a little more introverted, I guess. But it was quite a thrill, obviously.
Good Lord, that's a lot of icons crammed in a tiny space there for you to be sitting around.
No kidding.
Ralph Lauren was also there, who I thought was the Senator Joe Lieberman. I was like, there's Joe Lieberman. And Louis was like, that's Ralph Lauren, which if you look them up, they look very similar. But I was very excited. I was like, how about that?
Just hearing the name Joe Lieberman makes me laugh again. I hadn't heard that name in forever.
It's like, I was like, hey, how about we got a senator? And he's like, that's Ralph Lauren, you fucking idiot.
That's why he smells so good.
That's really cool.
But yeah, it was really cool. So
that is cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I didn't have a great Willie story, but I had a McCartney story.
No, that's good. Okay, well, thanks, Joe, for doing this with us.
Yeah, man, thanks for this. This is a blast.
This is great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I hope that was all right. Every time I'm talking, I'm like, you're talking too much, you moron.
Of course it was. You ever get to Nashville?
I was just in Nashville in August. I did.
Oh, that's right. We were out of town.
Yeah.
But they're gonna have me back. I just did one show Friday, one show Saturday. They're like, we'll have you back for like a full 4 or 5 show weekend. So hopefully,
cool.
Yeah.
Let us know when you do. We'll hook you up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. I love Nashville. So.
Yeah, it's fun here.
It's gotten wild.
Absolutely. I'll keep watch of the Zadie's calendar and holler at you.
Yeah, please do. Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks again for doing this, buddy.
Of course, anytime. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Joe List is my favorite comedian.
Yeah, man, that dude's hilarious. Hey, another one that's coming to Nashville. I think we might be friends.
Might hang out.
Who knows? Anyway, enjoy your groceries.
Don't be an asshole.
I know your mama's name.
Did we church yet? Enjoy your Sunday.